As usual, we have prepared ourselves today to listen to another exposition of the Lord Buddha's Dhamma. Before we continue, let us take a moment to remind ourselves of how extremely fortunate we are to be students and disciples of the great Master, the Lord Buddha. And let us do this as we recite the stanzas that were once uttered by a certain householder by the name of Upali. When questioned whose disciple he was, having been a lifelong and loyal student of a different teacher, having been his biggest benefactor for almost all his life, and then on one occasion, he has the good fortune of encountering the awakened one. After the awakened one, after a series of questions and answers, he is convinced. He is convinced once and for all. With conviction, he walks away from that one meeting, having changed once and for all. Having transformed into a stream enterer. His old ways of thinking put aside. His previous perspective on life, on all entities, changed for good. And then when asked, whose disciple are you now? This was the answer he gave. So let us be upstanding then to recite these stanzas, picturing in our minds that short story as it might have unfolded 2,500 years ago, and reflecting on our own selves, of how fortunate we are today, even after such a long period of time, to have the doctrine of the great Master so profound, so sublime, and so very much intact as to have helped us all come to that same conclusion. He is the Master, He is the perfect one, He is the most noble one, and His disciple I am. Dhirassa vigata mohassa pabhinna khilassa vijita vijayassa anighassa susamachitassa buddhasilassa sadhupanyassa vesantarassa vimalassa bhagavato tassa savako hamasmi akatanka tusitassa vantalokamissassa muditassa kata samanassa manujassa antima sarirassa narassa anupamassa virajassa bhagavato tassa savako hamasmi asansayassa kulassa venaikassa sarati varassa anuttarassa ruchira dhammassa nikhankassa abhasakarassa manachidassa virassa bhagavato tassa savako hamasmi nisabhassa apameyassa gambhirassa monapattassa Khemankarasa vedasa dhammattasa samvutattasa sangatigasa muttasa bhagavato tassa savako hamasmi nagasa pantasenassa Kina sanyojanassa muttassa patimantakassa dhonassa pannadhajassa vitaragassa dantassa nippapanchassa bhagavato tassa savako hamasmi Isi sattamasa akuhassa tevijassa brahmapattassa nahatakassa padakassa passadhassa viditavedassa purindadassa sakkassa bhagavato tassa savako hamasmi Aryassa bhavitattassa patipattassa veyakaranassa satimato vipassissa anabhinatassa noapanatassa Anejassa vasipattassa bhagavato tassa savako hamasmi Aryassa bhavitattassa patipattassa veyakaranassa satimato vipassissa Anabhinatassa noapanatassa anejassa vasipattassa bhagavato tassa savako hamasmi Namo tassa bhagavato arahato Samma sambuddhassa Namo tassa bhagavato arahato Samma sambuddhassa Namo tassa bhagavato arahato Samma sambuddhassa Okay. And now to observe the precepts. And seek refuge in the Noble Triple Gem. Please repeat all together and after me. Buddhang saranang gacchami. Dhammang saranang gacchami. Sanghang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami. Tatyampi dhammang saranang gacchami. Tatyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. Saranagamanang sampunnang. Panatipata veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Adinadana veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Kamesu miccachara veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Musavada veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Surameraya majjapamadatthana veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Tisaranena saddhing panchasilang dhammang sadhukang surakkhitam katva apamadena sampadeta. Okay, you may all now be seated. Also, before we begin, let us take a moment to invite the countless celestial beings, reminding ourselves that among them will be those who have been mothers and fathers to us and siblings to us, our friends and our family, teachers and so on, those who will have helped, supported and assisted us in this infinitely long journey in samsara, and sometimes with nothing expected in return. They were the true gifts, the real gifts from the bottom of their heart. And today we are privileged to have come across this Dhamma. We are privileged to have come across the only path to our deliverance, to freeing ourselves from all suffering. And therefore, just as was once done to us, let us now do unto others. Let us pass on this gift to all who have helped us, and also others who may not have thus far helped us. But we help because we understand and we appreciate that in this cycle of samsara, everyone is destitute, everyone's in despair, everyone's in need of help. And so, with compassion towards all sentient beings, as I now make this invitation out to the 10,000 world systems, inviting them to join us, I would like you to join me in extending that invitation in your hearts and in your minds with an abundance of compassion and loving kindness. Invite them all to join us and witness this meritorious deed. And if among them may be those who are lacking in merit, may they rejoice in this meritorious deed and acquire merits, and may such merits help them to free themselves from the woeful plane and be born in the blissful plane. And for all beings in the blissful plane, may they listen to the teaching of the Great Master, understand and comprehend it, and may we all attain the supreme bliss of Nibbana. Samanta Chakravalesu Atra Gachantu Devata Saddhammang Munirajasa Sunantu Saggamukhadam Dhammasavana Kalu Ayang Bhadanta Dhammasavana Kalu Ayang Bhadanta Dhammasavana Kalu Ayang Bhadanta. Okay. Also, before we continue, let us take a moment to seek forgiveness, for we have erred through speech, body, and mind, directing insults and offensive words towards the noble ones, the qualities that are most sublime, having fallen into the association of ignoble, immoral people. This is what we have done to us and brought upon us. But today we make efforts to free ourselves, and that journey is arduous. It is very difficult. We have made it difficult for ourselves. Realizing the errors in our ways, in our means, in our methods, let us take a moment now to seek forgiveness from the noble ones, from any thoughts, words of, or actions of insult, slander, desecration, discredit, revile, and offense that we might have directed towards them. The Samma Sambuddhas and the Pacceka Buddhas, Arahata Buddhas, Anagamis, Sakudagamis, Sotapannas, be they on the path of having attained the fruits, as well as the Buddhas, ministers, and Buddhashasana, may we be forgiven once and for all. And as you take a moment to seek that forgiveness, let me urge you to make a solemn oath to yourself, a solemn promise to yourself to never conduct yourself in that manner ever again. So let us now take a moment to do that. Okay, and finally, let us make every resolve possible that may, through the course of this sermon, we be able to shed the ignorance that has, since the beginning of time, veiled our minds and made us blind to the truth. May that ignorance be shattered, and in its place, may we be gifted with wisdom, and may through that wisdom we be able to see the truth, the four truths, realize the Four Noble Truths, free ourselves once and for all from the four great hells, and may we all attain the supreme bliss of Nibbana. With that resolve in mind, I invite you all to prepare yourselves now to listen to this sermon. Okay. Before we continue where we left off last week, I thought it would be prudent of us to get to one or two questions and try and see if we can find some answers to questions that you have put forward to us. There have been a fair few collecting over time, and let's try and see if we can get some answers to one or two of them at the very least. And then we'll continue where we left off last week. I think I also gave you some homework, so hopefully you should have something ready for that as well. Some of you have sent through your homework, which is excellent and always appreciated, because whenever you go that extra mile and whenever you take the time to demonstrate that you really want to get this done, to walk the path, to try and understand and comprehend and fulfill this journey, then of course, on our part, we are even more inspired to help you with that. Whether you submit your homework or not, you will always receive the sermons. But when we see your resolve, and when we see how diligently you wish to apply yourself to this, then of course, what you give is what you get. So, and of course, on the other hand, it also is an indication to us as the Swaminathan is delivering the sermons, to what extent people are able to relate to the sermons and to what extent you're able to comprehend what we discuss, because I appreciate that the circumstances in which we have to do these sermons are not ideal. Preferably, we'd be doing this face to face. So I think from your part, whenever you go that extra mile, it is always appreciated, because then it's good feedback for us or to us that you're still linked into this and what we are preaching to you makes sense and the topics are relatable into your day-to-day lives, because otherwise, there's no other way of giving feedback, is there? Now, rather than writing pages of testimonials, I try and give you the opportunity to answer a short question when it's appropriate through a piece of homework like this. And that way I know that you're hooked into this and things are making sense to you. So that is the intention behind that, and quite a few of you have sent through your homework from last week, and we'll get to that in a moment, but before that, let me try and see if you can pick up one or two questions and try and find some answers to that. Okay. So we've got a question here. Theruvan Saranai Swaminathan said, I get stuck when I meditate and try to get rid of my attachment to my mobile phone. I think this is a really good question, given that it's probably something that most people have a challenge with in this age of technology. We have almost become, our lives are dependent on it almost, isn't it? And the mobile device has become an indispensable piece of technology. I'm actually not attached to the phone as such, okay? Because I know I'm able to replace it with a new one in case it gets lost. It's interesting that you say that. So with all of these questions, folks, before I continue with the remainder of the question, with all of these questions, whenever we come across a question like this, I invite all of you to think of this question as one of yours. Instead of thinking, oh, someone's put forward a question, that must be a problem that they have. Fair enough. But, you know, I agree that, it is someone's personal question. Fair enough. But I think if we can be a bit more cleverer than that, a bit cleverer than that. And if we think of this question as our own, then two things will happen. One is you will listen to the answer more attentively. And two, you will actually listen to the answer. I mean two things by that. Listen to the answer more attentively means you will remain focused. If it were your own question, you would maybe take down some notes, maybe go back and listen to it again, and so on. And you do that when you consider this your own question. So the diligence with which you apply yourself to understand the answer to the question, the the effort that you exert to make sense of it, all of that. But the second, listening to the question or to the answer, by which I mean, remember we had this discussion about answers and solutions. An answer is to a question, a solution is to a problem. Of course, you put through questions, but I always try and provide you with a solution. By which what I mean is, in these words that you hear as an answer to this question, you should be able to, if you pay attention, identify a solution to a problem. Because most of the time, folks, it's just the question that keeps changing because the problem remains the same. I'll take a very simple example. I know I digress, but I think this is a very important point. We discussed this before. I'll very briefly remind you about what I mean by this. Say poverty. Poverty, and so there's poverty on one side. On the other hand, say hunger, or I'm hungry, or I don't have clothes, or I don't have books for school, I don't have the means to travel, or whatever the case might be. Each of these are questions to which you may wish for an answer, but the underlying problem is poverty. And it is from poverty all these other questions extend. They're extensions of the problem. So what I am trying to get across to you here, folks, is that when you listen to one of these questions put forward by one of you, one of our own listeners, and you listen to the answer, try and from the answer, try and develop that answer into a solution. By doing so, you're then able to apply that into your own questions in future. Okay? So let's go back to the question. I get stuck when I meditate and try to get rid of my attachment to my mobile phone. I really want the person, the gentleman or the lady who put forward this question, as well as everyone else, to really consider this next line, okay? Think this through and see how much what has been said here holds true. How much do you agree with this line? This is not by any stretch of imagination indicating that this was said untruthfully. But what I am asking you to do is listen to this line and ask yourself, is that true? Intention was, of course, the truth, because you're trying to ask a question. Why would you lie when you're asking a question? But when you see if you can listen to this line and see whether you can identify if there's anything erroneous with this particular line. Okay, I'm actually not attached to the phone as such, because I know I'm able to replace it with a new one in case it gets lost. Think about that for a second. That's not all of the question. There's more, but it's a very interesting line. I'll give it to you one more time. I'm actually not attached to the phone as such, because I know I'm able to replace it with a new one in case it gets lost. What do you think? Would you agree with that? Do you think that is true? I'm actually not attached to the phone as such, because I know I'm able to replace it with a new one in case it gets lost. Hmm. Okay. Let's continue. My problem is that I'm really dependent on it because of all the important information I have stored in it, which I have used to write down several years, which I used to write down several years ago in a notebook. Okay. The new smartphones have so many apps, tell me about it, which are very useful for daily use. So I'm very careful and very protective of the phone. In other words, I am vexed because I cannot afford to lose the stored information. I feel that a mobile phone is not a luxury, but a necessity for everyday life. Swaminatha, please help me to find a way to approach this problem. I listen to both Sinhala and English sermons, so you may answer me during either of these if possible. Okay, well, here we are. This would most certainly be helpful for Sinhala sermon too, given it's a problem that most people have, or rather, a question that most people have that stems from an underlying problem. Now, how do you people read this question? Where would you look for answers? Remember, it is not my job to catch fish for you, it's to help you learn to catch fish. So, what do you think? I want you to start thinking about this now. If this person were to come and ask you this question, how would you answer it? Where would you start? So, he or she is looking for some advice on how to approach this problem. Where would you begin? I'm getting stuck when I meditate and try to get rid of my attachment to my mobile phone. I'm actually not attached to the phone as such because I know I'm able to replace it with a new one in case it gets lost. That's still very interesting to me. My problem is that I'm really dependent on it because of all the important information I have stored in it, which I used to write down several years ago in a notebook. And then the new smartphones have so many apps which are very useful for daily use. I'm very careful and very protective of my phone. In other words, I'm vexed because I cannot afford to lose the stored information. I feel that a mobile phone is not a luxury but a necessity for everyday life. I think most of this we can agree with. Reading this or listening to this question, where do you think the problem areas are? Where should we start looking for answers? Because really understanding the problem, once you've understood the problem, the answer is there. As we discussed in last week's Sinhala sermon, we talked about that in great length. You'll remember. The only problem that really exists in this world is that people don't understand the problem. That is the only problem. The problem is the problem. Whenever a problem is properly understood, it is no longer a problem. So, let's go back to that interesting line. I'm actually not attached to the phone as such because I know I'm able to replace it with a new one in case it gets lost. What if you didn't know that? In other words, what if you were not able to replace it with a new one? How would you feel then? Today, you are able to replace most things as soon as they have outlived their useful life. Soon as something expires, you're able to get a new one. Soon as something breaks, you're able to get a replacement. Isn't it? I mean, we live in that sort of world. Everything's pretty instant these days. So if something breaks, something has expired, something's over, something's finished, you can go and get a new one almost immediately. I know of people who stock things up at home because I mean, not regular things like even unusual things, they'll stock at home because they can't go without them, not even a day, not even until it is their next shopping round. So they'll have a cupboard in which all sorts of items are stocked. Can you go without soap, for instance? Could you live without soap? What do you think? Could you live without toilet paper? Have you ever tried that? Oh, there are other ways and means of cleaning yourself. I mean, in my life, toilet paper is only something that I was introduced to in after my travels to the Western Hemisphere. In Sri Lanka, we are so rich, we use money. I'm just kidding. But could you do without it? Yeah, for me, from this question, folks, that line in itself is so interesting. I think we don't even need to go any further. I think that I don't know what you think about this, right? I think that people living in this day and age, because everything is so instantly available at very little notice, at very there's hardly any waiting time for anything to be acquired. I think people get into into the wrong notion that they are not attached to things. And I think the reason for that is because hardly do they have to ever wait for anything. Whenever something has run out, whenever something has expired, whenever something has come to its end, everything is a commodity now, isn't it? So they can be replaced very easily and very quite promptly. You have same day deliveries, or you even have delivery within the hour, and you can stuck things up. Don't you think there's an element of that has contributed to people thinking to themselves that actually they have no attachment to any of these things, because whatever they want can be replaced without much hassle. But didn't used to be the case back then, in the olden days, or when you know people didn't have instant everything. You had to wait for things. Things were not so freely available. So if you broke something, then you'd have to wait sometimes maybe a month, maybe 2 months, maybe six, maybe a year, maybe never, before you got a replacement for it. But now most things are pretty cheap, and there are ways and means to acquire things that are way beyond your income. So you have plastic money. All you have to do is type in the 16-digit number that's printed on the face of it, and the three digits, the security digits on the back of it, with the expiry date, and press the order button after you have selected the delivery time. And that you don't even have to pay for that this month. Sometimes not even next month. Sometimes you get a payment holiday. Sometimes you can pay for it in 6 months' time. Some people just keep on doing balance transfers from one card to another, to another, to another, and that credit just keeps, it's just there forever, never gets paid off. So then people fall into this notion that actually anything and everything is available to me, and if I can't afford it, then someone else will pay for it. And then when things are so readily and so easily achievable, it's easy to think, you could be forgiven for thinking that you're not attached to things. A long time ago in one of these sermons, I urged you to try and see if you can get along without some of the things that you have so become accustomed to having in your life. See if you can do that. Doing that in itself is not going to break your attachment, because if attachment is caused by ignorance, then it is only through wisdom that attachment will fall away. But I think a lot of people go through life living in this day and age, in a world where, in a consumerism world where everything's just so readily available, people think that they are not attached to things. It's a misconception. And I think people fall prey to that misconception because things are so readily available. And if that were not the case, then they'd realize the pain of having to wait for something. Fear and grief have almost been suppressed to very short periods of time. Because whenever you want something, it can be achieved pretty soon. But when it was not like this, you had to wait for a long time. This instant world is evidence to me, and it should be for you all as well, I would propose. An instant world is evidence that people are failing on a spiritual level. They're degrading on a spiritual level. A world that is more advanced in technology is a world that has degraded, that has fallen on its knees, on a spiritual level. Because after all this technology is to provide and satisfy needs and wants of people. Sometimes more wants than needs. So the more wants and needs you have, and the less time you're prepared to wait for it, technology has to come and fill in the gap. Because there's nothing else that can fill the gap. It has got to be technology. Because with the use of technology, you can get whatever you want, whenever you want it. So, my task to you is, perhaps you didn't have the chance to do that in the past, but you can do it now. Or if you've done it previously, then it hurts not to try and do it again. Take a moment to think about the things that you feel you're not attached to. Okay, you won't think you're attached to these things. Like your television. You're not attached to it, are you? Because, well, if it broke, you could replace it with a new one, couldn't you? Okay, so the more expensive the item is, the harder it is to replace. I get that, but that is why we have plastic money. Try and see if you can make a list of the things that you have almost, they have become part and parcel of your life. Things that you feel that are not a luxury these days, but a necessity for everyday life, such as this person feels about the mobile phone. I'm not saying that it is not a necessity. That's not for me to say, because your life, the rules and the circumstances. But what I'm saying is, even today there are people who go and live in seclusion. They get themselves off the grid and live in a world with zero technology. And they live, they survive. Not barely survive, they survive. They live. Some of them are happier for it, all the more happier for it. Sometimes the happiness that most people achieve in their life is incomparable to the happiness that they seem to be able to experience, having very little. After all, if it's bliss that you seek, then contentment is the path. You might feel, I mean, whoever's asked this question might feel that I'm completely tearing it up and almost criticizing the person for asking it, but far from it, sir, madam, far from it. You have asked for an answer. I'm giving you a solution, as is my duty. I'm offering you a solution. Because what I've said, I'll say that again. To understand the answer, to get to an answer, all you need to do is really understand the problem. These are not my words. It is the words of the great master, the all-knowing one, the omniscient one. What did he say? If you see one of the truths, the other three truths will become self-evident. He starts off by saying, this is the problem. Right? That's the first truth. This is the problem. As soon as you see the problem, the cause of the problem becomes evident. As soon as you see the cause of the problem, then it becomes evident that once you uproot the cause, the problem will be annihilated instantly. And if you understand that, then the path to that becomes self evident. And again, in his own words, if you realize one of the truths, then the other three will become evident. So he says that in no uncertain terms. I invite the lady or the gentleman who's asked this question to go back and read this question. Go back and read the question very carefully, word by word. If you do that, I think you'll realize that you no longer have a question. I'll give you some pointers. I'll help you guide. I'll guide you through to an answer. Yes, but there's no doubt about that. But again, I'm trying to share with you folks a method to problem solving, a really really effective method to problem solving. Whenever I have a problem, one of the first things I do is I write it down on a piece of paper. Writing it down on a piece of paper, it makes a lot more sense to me than when it is simply a few words that are floating around in my mind. Because when I write it down, I have to put the question into a solid form, into a solid form whereby that question has to make sense to somebody else as well. So I write it down in a way that it makes sense to someone else who's not me. And when doing that, I have to, of course, explain the problem, at least to the extent that the person reading it understands what the problem is. Imagine if you were mute and you weren't able to explain something to the other person by speaking to them. You would have to write it down, wouldn't you? or perhaps use sign language. Let's say there's no sign language and you had to write down the question, right? If you had to write down anything you want to communicate, you would have to write it down. Now imagine whenever you have a question like this, you write it down and go back and read the question. And here's the thing, right? When you do this, first write down the question with the intention of writing down the question. You want to really write the question down and make the question clear to a person who you're asking for answers. Okay? So that's the first thing you do. Secondly, go back and reread the question, but now read it looking for an answer. First, you wrote the question because you wanted to express the question that was in your mind. So now, really, you're the one asking the question. But what if you were the one who wanted the answer? I hope what I'm trying to get across to you here is making sense. Let me try that again. When you write down a question, so say, the question comes to mind, and I'm suggesting to you one of the best things you could do is write it down on a piece of paper. So you write down the question, and as you write it down, what is your intention? Your intention is, I want to get the question out of my mind, right? That is why you're doing this. And if someone else were to read this, then they should be able to understand it. What? The question. Okay, so at this point in time, you're the one asking the question. Once you've done that, now put yourself into a different role. You become the person who is now trying to find an answer to this question and go back and read it again. Now you have a different role. As you read this question a second time, with the intention of finding an answer to it, all you're doing is reading the same question. You're not doing anything different. You're just reading the same question, the very question that you wrote down. As you read this question, but now with a different intention, you'll realize that really what you've written down is an answer, not a question at all. You should try this and it'll make sense. You really should try this for this to make sense to you. Right now, I'm just giving you a method, and it may not make a lot of sense if you haven't done this before. But this is a very effective problem-solving technique. One that has worked for me countless times. I haven't read it in a book anywhere, so you can't ask me who says it's going to work. Well, the only answer to that I have is I say it works because I've tried it. But you have to put a different hat on when you read it as the one trying to find an answer. I'll take a simple example, right? Let's take a simple example. I have a problem. The problem I have is I don't have anything to eat, so I'm hungry. What's my problem? I don't have anything to eat, so I'm hungry. So I have a problem, and that is my problem. Now, I write that down on a piece of paper. I don't have anything to eat and I'm hungry. That is almost a complaint, sort of, isn't it? I don't have anything to eat, so I'm hungry. When you think of it from the mindset of the one asking the problem, it's as if you expect the world to give you an answer. Have you never felt that? When you have a problem, when you're the one asking the problem, you feel that you are entitled to an answer from others. That others are duty bound to give you an answer. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this, right? I'm saying, I'm just trying to show you a problem solving technique. Okay, I mean, in life, if you can't find answers to your own problems, then there's nothing wrong with going and asking for those who know, those in the know, those with the means and the methods to try and find some answers. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that is why you're here in the first place. But what I'm saying is, what if those resources weren't available to you? And what if you could solve your own problems? After all, wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that be Isn't that what we're trying to get to at the end of the day? Well, isn't that what the Buddha's intention was as the greatest teacher? He didn't give us an answer to a question. He gave us a solution to a problem, and he said, "Go and apply this solution that I've just given you to all problems, or to the problem, and then all your questions will be answered." Now, just think about that for a second. So, I don't have anything to eat, so I'm hungry. Okay, so think about that question from the eyes of the one with the problem, and you write it down on a bit of paper. And now, isn't there an expectation almost, as you word this problem, that someone is supposed to give you an answer? Isn't there an expectation that you deserve an answer from someone else? That you are due an answer from someone else? That the world out there, as in everyone but you, is supposed to give you an answer? I mean, isn't that why a problem comes into your mind in the first place? And then secondly, right? So the second step of this is, now that you've written the problem down, go back to the problem, but this time I want you to imagine that it's not you that has the problem. It's someone else's problem, and you have just been hired to find an answer to this problem. So what's the first thing you do? Of course, you'd read the problem. The moment you read the problem, what you realize is what you have just read is really an answer. What was the question again? I don't have anything to eat, so I'm hungry. Isn't the answer there? I don't have anything to eat, so I'm hungry. So what's the answer? Well, the answer is because you don't have anything to eat, you're hungry, right? Because you don't have anything to eat, you're hungry. So what must you do if you don't like to be hungry? Well, the problem is you don't have anything to eat. Then find something to eat. Then you won't be hungry. So if you find something to eat, you won't be hungry. You don't need a brain surgeon to work that out. But what you do need is the perspective of someone who's there to answer the problem rather than raise the problem. Okay, let's come back to the question again. So that's a technique, right? So my advice to you is, whenever you have problems, practical problems like this, and you can only do this with practical problems. You will struggle with theoretical problems because it doesn't work quite the same way. But for practical problems, you'll find answers to them in this manner. So that's a method. Whenever you have a practical problem, first thing to do, write it down. Write it down as if you were raising a complaint and you are expecting someone else to find you an answer. Once you've done that, go back to the problem and reread it. But this time round, change roles and be the one whose duty it is to find an answer to that problem. And I'll be surprised if you walk out of that activity still scratching your head, wondering, I wonder what the answer is. Because the answer you will begin to see in the problem. The example that we used in the Sinhala sermon, if you'll allow me to remind it again for the benefit of our Sinhala, of our English audience, is a ball of thread. A ball of thread that's entangled. A tangled ball of thread, right? Now, of course, you want to untangle this. And to do that, what would you do? You'd hold one end of the thread and you'd follow it until you found a knot, wouldn't you? And then what would you do? The moment you see the knot, do you require special assistance or special instruction, special advice on how to untangle the knot? Does that require special instruction? Or is the only reason that you have a tangled ball of thread because you haven't yet seen the problem? In other words, you haven't found the knots in the thread. When you look at it from afar, let's say you have a ball of thread a meter or so in the distance, right? Of course, and it's quite a big one. Say it's about the size of a let's say a tennis ball or a basketball. It's about the size of a football, right? So now you see a problem there. So to find a solution to this problem, what would you do? First, you'd pick up this ball and you'd bring it to you. And then what would you do? You try and find one end of the thread. Right? If you were informed that this is all one thread that's wound up and it's just got knots everywhere, then you try and find one end, because that's where you'd have to start. And the moment you find one end, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to follow the thread to find what? To find what? Answers or problems? You'd follow the thread to find what? Answers or problems? What do I mean? What do you follow the thread for? Looking for what? What are you hunting for? You're hunting for knots, aren't you? And a knot is what? A knot as in a K-N-O-T, not an N-O-T. A knot. A knot is a problem. That is the problem. But as soon as you find the knot and you observe it, you realize what the problem is. The moment you see the knot, what do you also see? How to untie that knot. Do you see the answer is encapsulated within the problem? They're always together. So the moment you see the problem, the moment you see the answer, is the same moment you see the answer. It's not like you see the problem now and you see the answer later. If you haven't seen the answer yet, you haven't seen the problem yet. Okay? So let's go back to this question. This might sound very abstract and maybe somewhat philosophical, but it actually makes real sense. It actually makes very practical sense if you try and apply this method. Do it a couple of times and then you'll realize what I mean. So I'm giving you a very practical thing to do here. Whenever you have a practical problem, take a bit of paper and write it down. That's the first thing to do. And as you write it down, you've got to remember, write it down in a way that someone who would read it, someone, like how some people send their problems to uh, the newspapers or the tabloids, and they have ask aunt somebody, and they reply to the questions, right? And in the next issue, then you can go back and read uh, the digest, and you'll be able to find the answers to the problems that you have put forward. People send all sorts of problems to the newspapers, right? So like that, write it down in a way where you would not be able to provide any more information. So it's complete. Anyone reading that problem will be able to understand the full detail of the problem without any further without you furnishing any further information. To be honest, folks, right? To be really honest with you, I'm sure that this is a method that you have used in the past without even knowing it. Can I show you? Can I give you an example of where you would have done that? When you have some really bothering problems, right? When there's something troubling your mind, what are some of the things that you do to find relief? Yes, yes, you go and sleep. Some people do that. Then what else? What's that? Consume a tub of chocolate ice cream. Yes, yes, you could do that also. What else? Binge drink. Oh, yes, of course. Yes, you could do that. You could binge on TV. You could binge drink, binge food. Yes, all that. Yes, yes, yes. But when you've tried all of the above and none of them work because they don't work. So what would you do then? One of the most effective things you'd do is you'd go and seek counsel. In other words, you'd find a friend to talk to, wouldn't you? You'd find someone who's prepared to lend a ear. Remember, they're lending an ear. They're lending a ear, not a mouth, a ear. What does that mean? Means they're listening to you. They're not doing anything else. They're only listening to you and sometimes maybe asking the right questions. What do? You talk and talk and talk and talk, and you give the full length, breadth, and width of the problem that you have. And at the end of that, what normally happens? At the end of that, you breathe out a great sigh of relief, and then you say, "Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me, and you have helped me find the answer to my problem." 9 times out of 10, the person that was on the other side sat down just listening to you, really said nothing other than ask you the right questions. So what happened then? So this is a technique that is used in psychology all over the place. Ask a good psychologist or even a psychiatrist, and they'll tell you. This is counseling. So all you got to do is you just got to speak your mind out loud. Because as you detail the problem, as you keep explaining and describing the problem, you begin to realize that only now have you understood the problem. Because it is through the description of the problem you begin to understand the problem fully. The reason that you weren't able to spot answers in the problem up until now was because you hadn't gone through the full detail of the problem until now. Lots of parts to this problem were left untouched, were left unexplored. So therefore, the full detail of the problem was not available to you, and therefore you were struggling with the problem because the problem wasn't 100% obvious to you. The answer was equally obscure. That this is why counseling works and it is so effective. What I'm trying to show you folks is how you can counsel yourself, how you can do counseling with yourself, because it's not always you can find someone trustworthy that you can go and speak your heart and mind out. But secondly, you need to learn to do this by yourself. Because if what the other person did was simply ask the right questions and nothing else, and they just lent you an ear and just listen to what you had to say, and then from time to time prod, excuse me, you with the right questions, then if you can do the same to yourself, then you're really independent. You can now find answers to your own problems. This is the method of the Buddha. What normally one needs to do with somebody else, the Buddha teaches us to do by yourself. So he gives us that power of independence. In understanding the problem, you will understand the solution to the problem. If you have understood 50% of the problem, you have understood 50% of the solution. If you have understood 60% of the problem, you have understood 60% of the solution, but 40% remain unanswered. You're struggling, you're wondering, gosh, I don't know the answer to this problem, I had better go and ask somebody else. Really, something even better you could do is try and understand the remaining 40% of the problem. You'll be surprised. You'll be surprised that the answer to the problem was then and there, was there all along. So really, that's why I said a problem is simply the miscomprehension. After all, a problem is miscomprehension. That's all. I mean, you could surmise as that. A problem is simply misconception, misunderstanding, or um, yeah. I mean, that's ultimately ignorance. If you don't comprehend the problem properly, the extent to which you don't comprehend the problem is the extent to which you have a problem. The moment you understand the problem is the moment you have understood the solution to the problem. So really, what people need to do, what I urge you to do, folks, is whenever you have a problem, stop trying to find solutions to the problem. Rather, try and understand the problem. This might sound like an absurd proposition, but this is the truth. This is the science behind counseling in psychology. Getting someone to open up and really talking through the problem, they find that the problem has been answered. And that's the very thing you should try and do. I mean, of course, if you're struggling, please go and seek help from others. We are always available to you for that. But as I always say, my duty as a teacher is not to find answers for you, but rather to help you find a method that you can use to answer your own problems. Wouldn't you rather that? Because there's going to be a day where I'm not going to be there in your life. Right? Today, when you have a problem, you can come and talk to me. You can ask your questions. You can send them through an email, right? Or when you come to the monastery, you can come and discuss it with the monks. And for as long as we exist, then we will always be there for you. That is a promise. And our word is good as gold, right? That's a promise. We're always going to be there for you. But remember, we see that our duty is much greater than that. It is not to help you find answers, but rather to help you find a solution, because that solution can be used to apply to a problem every time it manifests itself. And problems manifest themselves as questions. When you go back and apply it to the problem, then an answer becomes obvious. So, what is the methodology that I'm giving you here? That is, whenever you have a problem, the problem is that you don't understand the problem. It is not the lack of a solution that is your problem, but rather it is not understanding the problem, miscomprehension. In other words, wait for it, ignorance. Isn't that what the Buddha said is the root of all suffering? I hope you realize that this is really. I wish I had teachers in my life who would have explained to me what I'm trying to explain to you now in these words. Perhaps I would have had one or two teachers. I can't say I was entirely misfortunate, but maybe I just wasn't intelligent enough back then. I just couldn't understand what they were trying to explain to me. Perhaps. But today it just seems so obvious. And it makes sense in every single way because it is the method that was used by the Buddha. Ignorance is miscomprehension of the problem. One of my favorite analogies is someone asked me the other day, what is a really good way of explaining what suffering is? And the analogy that I offered was, imagine you're sat down under a coconut tree or any tree that bears fruit. Okay, let's take a coconut tree. You're sat down under a coconut tree, and a coconut has just come loose. Okay, from the top of the tree, it's just come loose, and it's now on its way towards the ground, and you're sat at the bottom of the tree. Now, what's going to happen in a moment? It's going to fall on your head, and it's going to injure you. Now, do we have a problem? Like, heck, we have a problem. Of course, we have a problem. It's a coconut. It's almost lethal. Coconut falling onto one's skull can do pretty serious damage. Okay, so now imagine before that, actually, this is a problem only until you see the problem, isn't it? If you didn't know that there was a coconut falling from the heights and it's on its way onto your head, isn't that the problem? Now imagine you look up. The moment you look up, You know exactly what to do, don't you? So the moment you see a falling coconut, of course, a falling coconut is the problem, especially if you're sat right under it. Right? So a falling coconut is a problem. Now, it's only it's only effective. It's only effective as a problem for as long as you are ignorant of the falling coconut. What are you going to do the moment you look up? Actually, what are you going to do? Just put that to a side. The moment you look up and you see this coconut, does the problem exist any longer? Because now you have seen the problem. And the answer is obvious. Of course, you could decide whether to take that answer or not. I mean, one could say, well, Swaminathan, so what if the coconut was too close to your head and you know it's far too late for you to move? What happens then? Well, still, the problem is obvious now. You've seen the problem. Whether there is enough time for you to, and you know, if you've seen the problem, now you also know the answer. But whether there's enough time for you to take the necessary steps to apply that answer, that's a different matter altogether. But have you not seen the solution? Seeing the solution and applying the solution are two different things. That is why we always urge heedfulness. One can become a Sotapanna today, but if they don't practice the path, if they just waste time, then remember, application of that can either be done at speed or it can be done leisurely. And depending on how soon, how diligently you apply the solution to the problem, then the sooner or the later that you relieve yourself of it. So the moment you look up and you see that falling coconut, the problem's obvious and the solution is obvious. Whether you decide to take that solution or whether you have enough time to take that solution or whether you have enough energy to apply that solution, they are all very different matters. My point being, if you see the problem, you have seen the solution. Not seeing the problem is equal to not seeing the solution. Therefore, you have the problem. So having a problem is the same as not seeing what the problem is properly. Right. I hope that is pretty clear to you now. If that didn't make sense, then do let us know. But I think you know, most people would have gotten that by now. I mean, it's not something terribly difficult to understand. You just need to think. It's a slightly abstract concept, but you just need to, you know, think about it and listen to it attentively, I suppose. If your mind's straddling two different things, you know, you might slip, or it might slip and might be difficult to construe. But I'm pretty sure that most of you would have gotten it. So let's come back to this question. I'm actually not attached to the phone as such because I know I'm able to replace it with a new one in case it gets lost. Do you not see the problem and the answer there? Being able to replace something with a new one, why is that necessary? Why is the ability to replace something with a new one or old one, doesn't matter. Why is the ability, okay? Why is it that the ability to replace something as soon as it is lost, broken, stolen, expired, etc., 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 Why is that? Why is it something that we celebrate? Why is that something that is important to us? Like when you go buy something, buy an electrical item or some equipment, maybe a car even, right? Isn't one of the things that you look for in your decision, in making a decision to buy the car? Excuse me, I think just got interrupted there. Sorry about that. So where were we? Yes. So in your decision to buy a car or some kind of electrical equipment, isn't one of the things that you look for in your decision making process the availability of spare parts, hmm? Or the service package? Isn't that one of the things you look for? Their service plan, their warranty period. Does it come with any guarantees? And particularly, the availability of replacement parts. Because where replacement parts are harder to find, then what do you know? What can you differ from that? Well, then if it breaks, then I'm not going to be able to get it back into a working state. And how does that affect you? It affects you because you are then no longer able to use it. And so then you'll have to live without it. That is a problem. Why is that a problem? Well, because you don't like living without it. So if you don't like living without something, what is that? Give me that in other words. Turn it around on its head. I don't like living without something. So give that to me in the affirmative. I like to live with it. Now that's the problem, isn't it? Isn't that a problem? When you like to live with something? So I'm actually not attached to the phone as such because I know I'm able to replace it with a new one in case it gets lost. I invite you to try and make sense of that line and see if you can spot an undisclosed, a conspicuous problem in there. Something that's hidden between the words, hidden between the lines. You're going to have to read between the lines for that. I don't mean necessarily about this particular problem. I mean, I want you to think about this, right? This premise of how we have today made ourselves feel better by reassuring ourselves that in the event something happens, something unfortunate, something untoward happens, such as we lose something, something breaks, something stolen, right? we we believe that it's not a problem because we can acquire it at very short notice. We can acquire it so easily and so readily and so promptly. And that's fine, except for the fact that that can mislead us to think that we are not attached to those things because the amount of time that we have to be with grief and fear is very short. But that does not mean to say that it is completely irrelevant to us. Fear and grief are still very much part of our lives. But the reason we don't experience it that much is because of this consumerism world that we live in. Everything's a commodity, and things can be replaced at the drop of a hat. So isn't that great? I mean, if technology and science and all the way that the world has been constructed, if they have managed to find an answer to that problem, then isn't that fine, Swaminas? Why are we even worrying about it then? What is the problem? Is there anything we need to do about it? Well, here's the thing. It's fine for as long as they're there. But what if that method was taken away from you? One. Two, either, there are two ways in which you could lose something. One, it goes away from you. And two, you go away from it. Either of these two things are bound to happen. Wouldn't you agree? Either you lose something or it loses you. Remember, we all have an expiry date. So there's going to be a day when you have to shut your eyes, you have to shut your ears, your smell, taste, touch, and all these things. So no matter what you have, there's going to be a day in your life where you're going to have to say goodbye to all of this. So what then? Then what do you do? Think about it. And there's an even bigger problem, one that we must not be blind to. Remember, for as long as fear and grief exists, you can run, but you can't hide. You can run, but you can't hide. And remember, this feeling of fear and grief we experience through the culmination of many chittas, many thoughts that arise and pass away, when taken as an aggregate. Okay, it is when it's taken as an aggregate, because you don't physically experience the fear or grief that is associated with a single consciousness or with a single chitta. You wouldn't experience that. So when it's taken as an aggregate, so I'm talking about many millions or many billions of chittas taken together. Now you begin to feel it. What technology has been able to do for us, what advancement in science and technology has been able to do for us, is to reduce the number of chittas which have to go through the experience of fear and grief. But it's never going to be able to completely eradicate that. Because every chitta is a single entity. So it arises and it passes away. Remember what I mentioned earlier? There are two ways in which you could lose something. Either you lose the object, or the object loses you. In other words, either the object is taken away from you, or you are taken away from the object. And that we know is conventionally through death. when you are taken away from everything around you. And then, no matter how much you have surrounded yourself with, you have to let go of everything at once. Now imagine, now let's go down macroscopic, or rather microscopic, and you go down to a single chitta. What happens with every chitta? Every chitta that arises must pass away. So with every chitta, you have to let go whether you like it or not. You have to say goodbye with every chitta whether you like it or not. So every chitta must let go, not by letting go of attachment, but rather by letting go out of no choice, because of its death. Every chitta comes to its death. And as it approaches its death, now it has to get ready to let go. But it cannot. That's the problem. It does not let go of it mentally. It does not, as in, it does not let go of it really. Or it only lets go of it physically because it has no choice. That letting go is not done through choice. It is not the choice move. There was no choice about it. So that's what I'm saying. You could, what science can do for us, what economics can do for us, what um, what business can do for us, what the world development with all its development can do for us, is reduce the number of chittas in each aggregate of chittas. And now we're talking billions of chittas. So where we used to have to wait for days before we could acquire what we desired, today we don't have to wait for days. Today we only have to wait for an hour, maybe. Okay? Today maybe we just have to wait for an hour. But it used to be that we used to have to wait for days and weeks and months on end. So what has science been able to do? Reduce the number of chittas in each aggregate. Excuse me. Just sneeze there. Excuse me. What science has been able to do, it has been able to reduce the size of the aggregates which has to experience this fear and grief. But in that aggregate, you'll always have discrete individual chittas, and there is nothing that can be done at that level to free each chitta from fear, from the suffering of fear and the suffering of grief. Nothing can be done because every chitta that arises has to pass away. That is not a choice. And for as long as ignorance exists, attachment exists. And for as long as attachment exists, then fear and grief that a chitta is bound to experience will forever exist. No advancement in technology is going to be able to do anything about that. The reason you don't feel it, or you feel it for only short periods of time, because the aggregates have been made smaller, because you don't have to wait for years or months or weeks now. It's come down to hours and maybe very long. Before soon, it's going to be, whatever you order will be there, will be with you in quarter of an hour. I won't be surprised if that technology and the business processes for that is just around the corner. I mean, Jeff Bezos is a fine entrepreneur. In his time, I'm sure, before, if it's not available already, it's been a while since I had any opportunity or had any need to study delivery times of our online retailers and people like the Amazons and so on. But I think in his time, he will make it a definite possibility that if you order something online, you will get it in the next 15 minutes. So the aggregate of the chittas that have to endure that grief and pain are smaller in number, but each chitta on its own, well, they have to suffer. There's nothing that can be done about that because attachment is there all along. Right? So I want you to think about that. So we've talked about a few things today. We've talked about this concept here of how no matter how much we have advancement in technology and science, it's not going to be able to take away fear and grief. Right? At the microscopic level, at each chitta level, there's nothing that can be done about it. It is not felt as such, but it's there. You will know that you had it after you are one day relieved of it. That's an important point for you to reflect on, folks. What do I mean by that? It's a bit like this, right? Um, Atmospheric pressure. Have you ever felt it? Some of you will say, well, of course, we're always in it. Yeah, but do you know what it feels like? You could say, well, this. No, that's not quite right. To know what atmospheric pressure feels like, you've got to be without it for at least a moment. Right? So if say, for instance, you were lucky enough to get yourself on Blue Origin, right? And you were one of those lucky people to, lucky within air quotes, to get yourself into space for a matter of 3 minutes or so, then you would have experienced being void of atmosphere, having no atmospheric pressure on you. Then you will know what it's like, what atmospheric pressure was like. So you only know it when you no longer have it. Yeah? What if you were born with a headache? You were born with a headache and you had to live with it. You wouldn't know what a headache was. You wouldn't really. Well, you would and you wouldn't. You wouldn't know what a headache feels like because it would just be normal to you. But the day you are somehow relieved of that headache, let's say somehow, you learn actually, that's not normal for you to have that headache, and you think and you realize, oh really, I never knew. I thought this was just the way it was. And then you are taken to a consultant, and then you receive some kind of treatment, and then you go, so you are given some drugs, and at the end of that course, um, your headache goes away. Now you realize what it was you had, right? So it's always you know what it was, but that's after the fact. Likewise, the fear and grief of every chitta you won't experience today, but you are experiencing it. You just don't know you're experiencing it. You will only know it the day that you stop experiencing it, what you had. These arahants, the stories, and their epiphanies, right? As their peons, as they go around knocking on doors and sharing this wonderful news with their fellow monks to say, I have achieved it, I have achieved it, I have accomplished it, I have freed myself. They never felt that as an anagami person. Why do they feel that as an arahant? Where's all that coming from? Because at the moment of becoming an arahant, they no longer experience that grief and that fear. So now they know what they had. Now they know what they had. You don't know it yet because you haven't become an arahant yet. But the day you become an arahant, you know what you had. Now likewise, with every chitta, there's fear and there's grief, and you will know what it's like one day when you no longer experience it. But don't you experience it? Oh, of course you do. You just don't know it. But what about the aggregates? Well, the aggregates you do. The aggregates you do. Because the resolution of the mind, so to speak, right? If I can use that term, the resolution of the mind is not a single chitta, because the mind is not that developed in samadhi. The Buddha can do that. His resolution of the mind, as in how much he can focus at any given time, you can fine tune it down to not just one chitta, but 16 processes as they work to bring a chitta into life and as it passes away. He talks about the 16 dependent origination processes and the execution in the arising and passing away of a chitta. So you can imagine, can you even, we can't even begin to understand that. The resolution of his mind, resolution as in how, by how much you can tell two things apart. Okay, so but our resolution is not is it's not even on the same scale. We say, I've had a bad day today. You talk about days here, isn't it? I've had a bad day. It's been a really good day today. You're talking about days. But in Chitta world, there's no such concept as days. Remember, we talked about time. My time is an illusion. It's just each Chitta on its own. What's this thing called days? The Chitta does not know what a day is. That's an aggregate. Lots of Chittas considered together. It's not like they come in packets or something. It's just lots of Chittas considered together. It's a reference. And again, that only happens through jati. That's something we'll talk about later. If not for jati, then you wouldn't be able to do that. Because arahants don't have bad days or good days. Their conception of time is very different to you and I. So replace it with a new one in case it gets lost. Good and true, but is that enough for us to convince ourselves that we are not attached to it? Why do we take solace in the fact that we can replace something? Is it not because that very thing is something that we may be attached to? If we were not attached to something, would we say, well, it doesn't bring me grief to know that that could be lost because it can be replaced at any time? If we are not attached to that, would we ever say that? Would we even think that? So I think that's one aspect of this question. Okay, but if you were to carry on, where the person goes on to say, the lady or the gentleman, my problem is that I'm really dependent on it because of all the important information I have stored in, which I used to write down several years ago in a notebook. Now, I think it's wonderful that people do this because it helps a great deal with the organization of life. And after all, there's no such thing as time management. There's only life management, right? So I'm all for it. Notebooks and writing things down and organizing yourself and planning things out as best you can, right? Setting your priorities and setting goals and using various methods to organize yourself and so on, right? I'm all for that. I know you're waiting for the word but, right? I'm a little bit reserved here because when I say but, it just kind of sounds like, well, the above is good, but it's not really good. That's not what I really don't want to get that idea across to you. It is a good thing. It is a really good thing to try and organize yourself, and you must do that. Everyone must. Even an arahant must try and organize himself. The problem here is, do we not see that there's an attachment to the information that you have stored on the phone. See, sir, madam, you're trying to get rid of an attachment to your mobile phone. Whether that attachment is there or not, I think we've discussed enough by now for you to work that out for yourself. Okay? Assuming that there is no attachment to the phone, you go on to say that you're dependent on the phone because there's important information on the phone, and you're worried that the loss of your phone will also mean the loss of that information. What does that mean again? There's the phone and there's something else that is very important to you. So important to you, it determines your happiness. The presence of it means you're happy. The absence of it means you're unhappy. In your own words, sir, madam, I'm very careful and very protective of the phone. In other words, I'm vexed because I cannot afford to lose the stored information. What would happen if you lost that information? Now let's bring it to real life. What would happen if you lost that information? Now, that's going to be it's a very, very broad question. It's a very generalized question. I understand, right? And the information, different bits of information mean different things to different people. I'm not blind to that. I understand that. But here's the point I want you to focus on. Does the presence of that information somehow make you happy? In other words, are you saying that to be happy, I must have this information? So is it the presence of that information that makes and keeps you happy? I get the whole thing about I feel that a mobile phone is not a luxury but a necessity for everyday life. Um, okay, okay. I mean, I get by fine without one. I can get by fine without one. But it's a necessity for everyday life, but it's not a necessity for happiness, is it? Let's try and see if we can understand what we need a phone for and what we don't need it for. It's a necessity for life, for everyday life. Meaning, it's got information in there about your. I'm assuming, okay, maybe your family's birthdays, anniversary dates, um, holidays, important holidays, maybe important appointments, maybe telephone numbers, maybe um, login details of bank accounts, which is highly dangerous. But I only know this because it was drilled into our heads when I used to work in banking. Always to inform our customers and clients never to keep their banking details on bits of paper and phones and things like that. But that's besides the point. We might have your email addresses, maybe some login details of things, and maybe account numbers, right? Um, Things like that. Addresses of important people in your life. what they like, what they dislike, all sorts of things. And so they are something of a convenience. I think that would probably be a word you'd agree with me on. They make life convenient. So by token of which, it's a necessity for life, and I'm thankful to the gentleman or the lady for using that word. It's a necessity for life, but it's not something that should determine your happiness. And we mustn't think of the two things as one. What's important for life should not be construed as what is important for happiness. But if somehow you have gotten the two mixed up, now there we have a problem. What's important to live a convenient life is if somehow now determines your happiness, don't we have a problem there? So the presence or absence of your account details will mean whether you can log into your account or not. But if that then by extension affects your happiness, now that means your happiness is conditional. So to your long list of things that have to be so for me to be happy, you have added a few more things, such as these bits of information must be readily available to me for me to be happy. Their absence puts me in fear, puts me in grief. Well, I suppose the absence would put you in grief, and their presence will keep you in fear, because you're fearful, you're afraid, you're worried that you might lose it. Meaning you're attached to it, meaning your happiness depends on it. Remember, you need information for life. See if you can I'm trying to get my this idea across to you folks, and I hope you can relate to what I'm trying to say here. You need information for life. To live life conveniently, you need lots of information, like how to tie your shoelaces. It's something you need to live your life. But is it something you need to be happy? How to cook some food is something that you will need for life. How to walk, how to use an umbrella, how to make a phone call, how to log into your accounts, how to write a letter, how to read a book. All of these things are bits of information that make your life convenient. They are a convenience for life, but are they things that you have now allowed to become things that determine your happiness? In other words, then, your happiness is all the more dependent, all the more conditional for you having done that. And unconditional happiness means it matters not what you have in your life or you do not have in your life. That is why it's unconditional. I don't need this. I can do with it. I can do without it. The presence or the absence of it has zero impact on my happiness. Let me share with you something I shared with my parents recently in a sermon I had with them. See if you agree with me. I explained to them, Amapati, I have today understood my role as your son. I would be very ashamed of myself if on the hearing of your passing away, I find myself in tears. I'd be more disappointed that my eyes have teared up than by the fact that I have lost my parents, should that happen. That would make me even more disappointed with myself, that I'm left with tears in my eyes. If I do find myself in that situation, I really doubt I will, but if I do find myself in that situation, I'd be really disappointed with myself. Much, much, much more disappointed than at the loss of my parents. And I've said this to them, and they agree with me. And they agree with me that it is right that I think that way. Because they know that I don't think that way out of spite, but rather it is because I'm working towards an unconditional happiness. And really, to be really fair on them, they wish that upon me. They're really happy for me that I have been able to work towards that, and I'm working, and I continue to work towards that. And I'm really grateful to them for understanding me in that way. So, today I can tell them, Amma Apache, I do not plan on crying at the news of your death, so please don't expect me to. And they said, by Swaminathan, by no means, because today we understand that crying at someone's death is completely, one, pointless. Two, it does nothing to help the person who has just passed away. And three, it's an expression of selfishness. It's an expression of selfishness. So the fact that you don't cry at our funeral is an indication to us that you have progressed, and it's something that we'd really want for you. So I'm quite pleased that they're very understanding and accepting of that. So that's besides the point. Now, but what I did explain to them was, although today I see that crying at someone's death is an absolutely absurd thing to do, that does not mean that I do not have a duty and a responsibility towards them. The less I cry at their loss, the more I feel I am duty bound to them. I have a responsibility to help them. The two things happen together. The more I see myself as someone who has a duty to fulfill towards them, the less I am inclined to lament or to moan their death. So things that are, for instance, the phone or the internet connection or Skype or a computer or all of the other things that perhaps I use to maybe deliver a sermon to them, or even language, words, time, all these things, right? They are a convenience for me to fulfill my duty, to fulfill my responsibility, but that's where I draw the line. The fulfillment of duty and the fulfillment of responsibility. Because that is healthy. Fulfilling duties and responsibilities is very healthy. If you ask me, that is what affection is. That is what love is. That is what caring is. If you ask me, this is only my personal opinion, folks, and you are welcome to differ from that of mine. Crying, weeping, lamenting, mourning, and showing distraught at the death of someone who's a loved one is not an expression of love, is not an expression of affection or care. I would argue that it's far from it. I would argue that it's an expression of selfishness. But that's a discussion for another day. Why that is an expression of selfishness. Okay, but things that we need in our life, we need to fulfill our duties and responsibilities to others, and secondly, to survive. Only to the extent of survival. But remember, to survive, we don't need a tenth of the things that we have become accustomed to today. I'm not saying we need to go back into the to the ice age or the stone age and walk around naked. No, I'm not suggesting that by any means. And please don't. What I'm suggesting is survival is one thing. Survival or living a life that is, think of it this way. Um, we need clothes, right? We need clothes for two things. One, because it helps us to protect ourselves from the elements and from insects and so on. And secondly, it is the decorum in society. It is considered rude to be naked, to show respect towards others, to be polite to others, right? We dress ourselves up and cover up all the bits that we shouldn't have on display. Right? And now see, that is a duty that we have. That's a responsibility that we have. So do you see there's a duty and responsibility towards ourselves and others? What is that towards me? To protect this body, okay, to protect this body from the elements and from insects and mosquitoes and things like that. And then towards others, to live to show our decency, to be polite, to not offend anyone. So again, that's a duty and a responsibility. So what do we need clothes for then? It's not for survival. I mean, it is, but you don't need all the things that you have make people make use of today for survival. Look at all the garments that people have today, all the accessories. You don't need all that for survival. All the types of food that we have today. I mean, that's a classic one. All the food items that we have today. All the varieties. You can't argue that is for survival. For survival, you need your nutrients, yeah, your minerals and your vitamins and your lipids and your carbohydrates and your proteins and so on, right? So if you get them in the right quantities, then that's it, right? So where does papadums fit into the picture? Is that for survival? No. So that is not a necessity for everyday life. It is rather something that we use to relieve ourselves of vexation. So in other words, our happiness is bound to that item. We make ourselves happy by giving ourselves those things. And the same goes for electrical items, such as the one that this person has asked us about. That phone that you talk about, sir, madam, or the information that's stored on it, is that information that is absolutely essential for sustenance? Then by all means, you have a duty, you have a responsibility to safeguard and for the safekeeping of that information. So what would I suggest? Get a backup. I'd be the first one to suggest that. All the sermons that we do at the monastery, we make sure we take backups of that. Why? Because in these sermons we have the essence of the truth expounded by the Buddha. So they must be around for a long time to come. Not just you and I, but many generations on from today, they must be able to listen to these. So this is why we make them available on YouTube, and also in other places where we keep them. We put them aside for safekeeping. Question here is that information for survival, for life, for sustenance, or is it for happiness? The two things are very different. Like an arahant. Now, you see, let's put it this way: an arahant is perfectly capable of using a mobile phone, and an arahant is perfectly capable of using a mobile phone with some information that's stored on it. Okay, so because and that may include, say, for instance, the telephone number of a doctor, or maybe the telephone number of a devotee, or maybe the date of birth, things like that, or maybe his blood type, or maybe some kind of vaccination schedule, or maybe some important appointments that he has had to make, and so on. So perhaps he's got that on a mobile phone. But the loss of none of those things affects his happiness, does it? You could burn his mobile phone, including all the information, without a backup. Imagine, just pretend, imagine that all the information that was stored in his mobile phone is destroyed. Someone sets his phone on fire. Now all the information is gone. Do you think that's going to affect his happiness? Is it going to make life a little bit more difficult for him? Absolutely. If he, for instance, had the number of a devotee who had offered to him transport whenever he needed to travel somewhere, if and whenever he needed to travel somewhere, let's imagine there was a devotee who said, Swaminathan, if you need to go somewhere, if you need to travel, please do me the honor. Please just give me a call and I'll be there as soon as possible. Okay, so let's imagine that that was agreed. Now when he needs to travel somewhere, okay, and he can get to wherever he wants to go quite easily. All he needs to do is give a call, and he does that out of compassion, because the person who has offered it earns merit out of it. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay, so but now let's say he lost his phone, and let's say he lost all the information that was stored on it, including the telephone number of this devotee, the devotee who's expressed his interest to provide transport to the monk. What's he going to have to do now? Now he's going to have to walk. And if it's a really important journey, if he's made a promise to someone, then if it's 10 kilometers away, he's going to walk all that 10 kilometers. Is he going to suffer? Yes, physically. It's going to be painful. It is going to be painful. There's no doubt about that. It's going to be painful. He's going to have to walk in the hot, scorching sun, right? If it's a hot day. He's going to have to stop for alms on the way. Depending on whether he wears footwear or not, then it's going to burn his feet. He might get pricked with something on the road, and all sorts of things. So is it going to be more painful? Is he going to have to endure an amount of suffering? Yes, absolutely. But is that going to impact his mental state of mind? His state of mind? Absolutely no. Why? Because his happiness is not dependent on those things. And is it when we think to ourselves about if some things are a luxury, if some things are not, I think it's a different interpretation. People refer to different things as luxury. Right? If a mobile phone will be a luxury whether you like it or not in some parts of the world. It'll be considered luxury. But in most places in today's day and age, in an advanced, or rather in a well-to-do community, then of course a mobile phone is not considered a luxury. Again, that's very relative, isn't it? My point is it's about none of these things. It's more about happiness. I just want folks, you all to be happy. At the end of the day, that's what all this is for. I just want you all to be happy. True happiness. First, achieve conditional happiness that is not bound and not based and not founded in the unmeritorious deeds, right? So that is all about becoming a Sudhu Manusya. Okay? And then aim for a happiness that is unconditional. Because what is bad is to seek happiness by engaging in unmeritorious deeds. What is mediocre is achieving happiness by engaging in meritorious deeds and refraining from unmeritorious deeds. What is happiness superior? A superior level of happiness is an unconditional happiness where you don't have to do anything, you don't have to save anything, you don't have to keep anything, you don't have to hold on to anything to be happy. It's just happiness. I'll use your own words here. I'm vexed because I cannot afford to lose the stored information. And that is because your happiness has become dependent on the availability of that information. Sir, madam, what I want to try and help you understand is it should not be your happiness that is dependent on that. Your life may be dependent on it. Paying your bills may be dependent on it. Getting your bank account straight may be dependent on it. Sending your children to school may be dependent on it. Right? Getting your car taxed and MOT'd, all that may be dependent on it. But your happiness should not be dependent on it. A mobile phone is necessary. Yes. For what? For everyday life. A mobile phone is necessary. For what? For happiness. Oh no. What is it that is necessary for happiness? Nothing. That is an unconditional happiness. So what must you do about this problem? Exactly. Understand the problem. Understand the problem. You have requested, Swaminatha, please help me to find a way to approach this problem. What you need to do, sir, madam, is to understand the problem. Do you need what you say is important to you? Do you need it for your happiness? If that were the case, then people in whose lives these things don't exist, there's no way they could be happy. There's no way they could be happy. Go back a few generations. People didn't have all these things and people didn't need access to all this information, certainly not at their fingertips. Now, I understand, of course, the world is more complicated than that, right? And the world expects you to have information readily available at its beck and call, right? I understand all of that. On demand, you have, it's almost like, we have become puppets. Just as you expect information from someone else to be available readily, then people expect the same of you. And if you're not able to provide that instantly, then you become redundant. If you don't carry a mobile phone these days and don't have access to that information, then, you become redundant. You stop becoming relevant. You're odd, you're queer. So really, sometimes maybe to fit in, you have to carry a mobile phone. Sometimes, to fit in. But it should have no impact, no effect whatsoever on your happiness. So when you meditate, sir, madam, you say you get stuck when you meditate and try to get rid of my attachment to my mobile phone. We discuss two things here. Okay? Although you feel you're not attached to the mobile phone, maybe there is an element of that. Maybe. I can't say for certain because only you'd know that. But remember, From reading what you've said here, you take solace in the fact that it can be replaced with a new one in case it gets lost. To me, that sounds like that's how you make your mind up. I may be wrong, and if so, please ignore these words. But if you seek reassurance from the fact that your phone can be replaced in case it gets lost, and that is how you make yourself feel better, and sorry, if that makes you feel good about the fact about the losing the phone is not, it's not so much a problem to you now, and you feel that's okay because you can be replaced, that should not be an indicator that you're not attached to your phone. To me, that is a big indication that you're still attached to your phone. But again, I repeat, I may be wrong. It's everyone for themselves. I want you to think about that, okay? Because you're asking me for an approach to the problem. I'm not here to give you answers. I'm here to give you exactly what you have asked for, madam, sir, which is right. You have asked for that. What is the way to approach this problem? And that this is how to approach the problem. And secondly, think about that information piece. Is the information required for life? In which case, that's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Or or has it become a necessity for your happiness? Happiness is one. Fulfilling duties and responsibilities is another. Because the fulfillment of duties and responsibilities must happen whether it makes you happy or not. It should not be your concern whether it makes you happy. Whether it makes you happy or not, you should look after your parents. Whether it makes you happy or not, you should feed your family. Whether it makes you happy or not, you should help your children with their homework and teach them good manners and teach them to be a law-abiding citizen and do your duty to your neighbors, to your friends, to your siblings, to your cousins, to your parents, and so on, to your wife, to your husband. Whether it makes you happy or not, you should do it. Because that's a duty, that's a responsibility, and we are all duty bound and bound by responsibility. That is a necessity for life, for everyday life. But they are not factors that should affect happiness. Happiness should be unconditional. So think about that. Okay? Now, I want to, before we wrap up, I want to go back to the question I left you with and some answers where we got back to the question. So let's jump into our whiteboard. See if we can do that. Can you see that okay? It seems like it. That's more like it. Okay. So, where did we stop last week? We discussed, I think we brought back the example from a couple of weeks ago, and we talked about dreams. Oh, this is about how the notion and the dimension of time does not exist in the dream world. It does not exist in the sensual world. Yeah. So, and the sensual world, as we said, is a creation in the person's mind. That is what we call karma. The sensual world is created in the person's mind, and sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. Some examples include food, clothes, perfume, and so on. Are a combination of these things: sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. And in a sensual world, we create a sensual world so that sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch, in other words, sensual experiences, can be had without the restrictions and limitations of a time bound existence. In the real world, we are bound by time, but in the sensual world, we are not bound by time. Therefore, sight, sound, smells, taste, and touch, which you so desire, can be acquired very easily, very promptly, on demand, in the sensual world. We've discussed this at length now, and I think for anyone who might have missed those discussions, I should urge you to go back and listen to the previous sermons. We use the example of a pizza. Here were some examples. I think pepperoni and chicken, pineapple, mushroom, sausage. Was it sausage? Cheese and tomato, broccoli. That's appetizing. A broccoli pizza. So we talked about a pizza, and I think the question I asked you was the pizza that comes to mind when the word pizza is uttered, or you hear the word pizza. Yes, that's the question I asked. When I say pizza, a particular pizza comes to mind, and it'll be different for each and every one of you. Of course, two of you may have the same choice, but that's it. It's not because the two of you are known to each other. They're unrelated. Without a connection between two people, it may be that two of you have the same choice, but that is not through connection to each other. There's no relation there. So the question to you was, how is it that a particular pizza comes to mind when it's the same word that is heard by most people? And I think even going one step further, I suggested, for some of you it might have been quite bizarrely, that the pizza that comes to mind is the one that you know least about. Remember that? It's the one that you know least about, not most about, but least about. So your favorite pizza is the one that you know least about. How is that so? Would you agree with me? Those who have sent answers through, I was quite impressed by some of them. And those who haven't answered, maybe you all have, I'm not sure, maybe you all have. But those who haven't answered, is that because you disagree? Or do you think that the pizza that is your most favorite pizza is the one that you know most about? Like how the cheese melts in your mouth, or how you feel the sausage in the crust? Actually, side note, I wonder how many people at the end of last Sunday's sermon ordered pizza. That'd be interesting. Because after the detailed description and the mental imagery, and all these options of pepperoni and chicken and mushroom and all that, I wonder how many people whetted their appetite with a pizza last Sunday. Is that you? You don't have to answer that question, but you know who you are. Okay? I wouldn't say it's a sin, but I would urge you to think it through. What happened there? How come you never wanted a pizza, but I mentioned the words and you went ahead and got yourself a pizza? Isn't that how you fall for advertising? Anyway, that's besides the point. So coming back to what we were discussing there, how is it that the pizza that comes to mind, the pizza that gets created in the sensual world, this one here, and that was the mind, and it creates a sensual world inside this mind, the chitta that arises and passes away. How is it that your favorite pizza comes here, and that is the pizza that you know least about? Well, the answer is, folks, the pizza that comes to mind here is the one that the mind is clinging on to, isn't it? So this was a hint I suggested to you. That is the one that is upadan. That is the one that is clinging or clung onto. And then clinging is a product of attachment. Clinging is based in attachment. Tanha pacha upadana. Now, attachment, on the other hand, is based in ignorance. Avidya pacha tanha. What is ignorance? Ignorance is lack of knowledge, lack of true understanding about something, someone, and so on. So, if it's ignorance that is the cause of attachment, and attachment is the cause of clinging, then the pizza that the mind has clung on to has to be the one that you are most ignorant about. Would you agree? The pizza that you are most attached to should be the one that you are most ignorant about. What do you think? And that being the case, it should be the one that you know least about. Because if ignorance is the lack of knowledge, then it is the one that you know least about. What is to be in the know is to have knowledge. Right? So that's the one that you should know least about. Isn't that ironical that your favorite pizza is the one that you know least about? So if you don't know anything about something, that's going to be your most favorite thing. So what about your best friend, your most favorite person? That's the person you know most about or least about? Really, that's the person you know least about. Talk about making friends with people, with strangers. Your best friend is your biggest stranger. You know nothing about that person. You got to understand this in the context that I mean it here, of course, folks. What I mean by ignorance here is not knowing their name, or in case of a pizza, what are the ingredients, right? How hot it is, or how spicy it is, how oily it is, or its nutritional information about the pizza. It's not any of these things. What I mean by ignorance here is, what is the ignorance that is the cause of attachment? It's not just any old ignorance. Ignorance that is the cause of attachment is ignorance that is pleasurable, joyful, and essential. Excuse me. Excuse me. That is ignorance. The ignorance that something, or someone for that matter, is pleasurable, joyful, and essential. So if you believe that something is pleasurable, joyful, and essential, then on that premise, on that knowledge, attachment arises. As the Buddha goes, yan loke priyarupam satarupam ette satanha uppajjamana uppajjati ette nivisamana nivisati. So that's in the Pali, meaning where something is considered to be pleasurable and joyful, so he says rupa, in other words, form. Okay, so let's just take it as collectively as something. Where something is considered or held in one's view as pleasurable or joyful, then ette tanha uppajjamana uppajjati. That is where attachment arises. Ette nivisamana nivisati. That is where attachment exists, prevails. So you see, that is what causes attachment, that is what causes clinging, and you know what happens thereon. From clinging we go on to becoming, and from becoming we go on to existence or jati, and then from there on to the 11 great fires. So you see, where that goes on to the 11 great fires, if I were to draw it out on here, this is the ignorance. Ignorance is what do we mean by ignorance here? Pleasurable, joyful, and essential. What about? Well, it's about the particular pizza, the pizza that you know least about. Well, of course, it's the one you know least about, because that is why you think it's pleasurable. If you were to know anything about a pizza, about that particular pizza, let's say yours was chicken pizza. If you were to know anything about this, what's the first thing you need to know about your pizza? That it is not pleasurable. That pleasure is not something that exists in the chicken pizza. That joy is not something that exists in the chicken pizza. That it is not full of essence, but rather it's essence-less. Rather it's joyless. Rather it's not full of pleasure, but sufferable, vexatious. Right? So this is ignorance. The presence of this is ignorance. What is this in relation to? The chicken pizza, if that is your favorite pizza. So therefore, if you're ignorant about chicken pizza, the amount by which, the extent to which you're ignorant, that is the extent to which you are attached to it. Excuse me. Because you're so ignorant about it that you think it's pleasurable, joyful, and essential, and therefore, by that extent, you attach to it. By that amount, you cling to it. And by that amount, what comes on from clinging? From upadana, you have bhava, right? Which is becoming. That's the word of our choice for now. And then from that, you have jati, which is existence. And from there on, you have what? 11 great fires. What 11 great fires? This is where we have lamentation, fear, suffering, grief, mourning, and all these things. Shoka, parideva, dukkha, domanas, upayasa. Yam picchanna labhati tampi dukkha. Apyehe sampayogo dukkho, piyehi vipayogo dukkho. Panchapadana khanda dukkha. All this, the 11 great fires. So you see, your favorite pizza is really the one that brings you, that puts you in this cauldron of suffering. So now, is it good to have a favorite pizza? Because it's your favorite pizza that takes up space in your sensual world. When you create the sensual world, really what you're doing is you're creating an instance of this pizza, your favorite pizza in your mind. This box being the mind, this is being the circle being the sensual world, right? That's where you're filling this up with the pizza. Which pizza? The one that you say is your favorite, which in this case is the chicken pizza. But remember, that is the very pizza that you believe is pleasurable, joyful, and essential. This is what ignorance is. So ignorance is not knowing something. So therefore, it's the one that you know least about. So you see how ironical then that your favorite pizza is the pizza that you know least about. You know nothing about it. If you did, well, that's the one you know least about. Right? And your favorite pizza, also on the other hand, is the one that leads you to 11 great fires. Is it fair then that you call it your favorite pizza? Don't you think this word favorite is pretty overrated? Do you think you think something you know least about should be termed your favorite? And also, you think something that puts you into a cauldron of fire and an endless amount of mental suffering should be referred to as your favorite? Something to think about, isn't it? But this is what you fill your sensual world with. And in that world, of course, as we discussed, there's no time. It's not time bound. So the moment I say pizza, in the next instant, chicken pizza comes to mind, because that is your favorite pizza, and it is that very image that puts you into fire. Because as the moment you have it in your mind, just like what happened with this mother with her son, right? The moment her mother wants the son. Let's go back one slide. There we go. Yeah. The moment the mother wants to be with my son, you're either in grief or in fear. right? So the moment that the mind is occupied by your favorite item, that is your pizza, at that very moment, you have just created the sensual world, and there grief and fear prevail. Who in their sane mind would want that? And who in their sane mind wouldn't bother, wouldn't try, wouldn't attempt to free themselves from that? That's why continuously feeding yourself with the things that you find pleasurable and not reflecting on it is a poison cocktail, because it continues to cement it in the mind time and time after, and then it becomes incredibly difficult to break the attachment to it, to break the upadana to it, because you're not reflecting on it. So you see, the only thing that can break this chain reaction is if you were to replace avidya with vidya, which is what? Which is wisdom. What is wisdom? That it's vexatious, sufferable, and essenceless. What? This chicken pizza. Now what happens? Now what happens is you're no longer ignorant. And where there's no ignorance, there's no attachment. When there's no attachment, there's no clinging. When there's no clinging, there's no becoming. When there's no becoming, there's no existence or jati. And when there's no jati, there are no 11 great fires. So that is the only way out of this. So what should you do then? Stop eating pizza? No, that is, we take a practical approach to things, folks. We are not about doing or not doing. The only things I'd say don't do are the 10 unmeritorious deeds. These are the only things I would say do not do at any cost. The 10 unmeritorious deeds. Anything else, my suggestion to you would be, while you do it, I'm not saying you have to go and do it. That's up to you. While you do it, reflect on it. It is through reflection, not by abstinence, but through reflection that ignorance is replaced with wisdom. It is not through abstinence, through reflection. First, of course, you need to understand this and come to right view, which is a samadhi. And then from there on, it is a reflection. The reflection happens at samma sankappa. Nekkama sankalpana, avyapada sankalpana, avinsa sankalpana. It was the sort of the meat of the discussion in the singular sermon of the past couple of weeks. How there is no such thing as a good or a bad person, but rather it is the thoughts and the makeup of those thoughts which should be considered in our passing judgment. Does this make sense, folks? This is the truth. So, it's the really sad thing is, right? Here's the joke. This is the most pathetic joke, right? Weren't we taught as young children at school, from our parents, teachers, friends, and so on, to have a favorite everything? You didn't come into this world with a favorite color, did you? You were taught to have a favorite color, weren't you? Your favorite toy, your favorite color, your favorite food, your favorite dress, your favorite eyeliner, your favorite lipstick, your favorite mascara, your favorite holiday, your favorite trip, your favorite person, your favorite cat, your favorite bat. You were taught to have a favorite everything. Because apparently, it was the done thing, it was the normal thing to have a favorite. I remember being taught that my favorite color was red. I was taught that. I often wondered, it was always a struggle for me to work out why is it that I have to have a favorite color. I mean, why do I need a favorite color? Why can't it just be, there are colors. When you need red, you use red. When you need blue, you use blue. I mean, why should I have to have a favorite color? I remember to this day, I was in the principal's office. For heaven's sake, I was in the principal's office, and my principal asked me, "What is your favorite color?" Because I got caught for doing something naughty. Um, Not much. It wasn't anything terrible from what I remember now. I had a bad habit of keeping my mouth open, not talking a lot. I was just a young child. I always had my mouth open because I was just mesmerized by what people had to say. So I was, far in my thoughts. I just had my mouth open, and then my principal, she summoned me and also got my parents to come around and come over. Um, and that was just not because I had my mouth open, but rather I think it was during a parents teachers meeting, and it used to be there. Even the principal took the opportunity to speak to parents, which is awfully nice of her. And I remember when she was giving me instruction advice, one of the things my parents said was, he's not very tidy at home. Um, to This was a very very young age, right? So it's not now. I think I was about 6, 7, something like that. And then my principal said that I should get myself a cupboard and a hanger so that I could hang my clothes, and a cupboard so I can put my clothes. And so I was asked a question: "What is your favorite color?" I was baffled by this question. My favorite color? Yes. What is your favorite color? Uh, I uh, I don't know. Red. Okay, yeah, that's your favorite color. Very good. So let's then the instruction came to my parents: get him a red cupboard, which I eventually got, a red hanger, which I eventually got. Then there was a red set of drawers, which I got, and everything had all of a sudden started to become red in my room, because somehow I had to decide that red. I was put on the spot. I had to say what my favorite color was. I mean, I had to come up with an answer because it just felt so awkward when everyone was just looking at my face, going, "What's your favorite color?" And somehow I felt that not having one was a sin, right? And I thought I was probably going to get crucified for not being able to answer that question. And so I had to say something, and red was the first color that came to my mind, and I said red. That was just a spur of the moment answer, and so eventually that became my favorite color. I presume you all have learned that you have a favorite color. I think so. I think so. I may be wrong, but I think so. And again, I don't think I can be wrong, because given the doctrine as it is, where everything starts with a view, and that view has to be implanted from somewhere, from someone, through the eyes or ears, then it has to be something that we acquire. There may be traits that we carry on from our previous existences, but the majority of it, I think, are things we learn on the way, along the way. So yeah, I mean, favorite color, favorite sport, favorite person, favorite sports person, favorite everything, favorite tree, favorite flower, favorite everything. We've got a favorite everything now, haven't we? Favorite pizza. So the irony of this, I mean, I haven't got any problem with there being favorite this, that, and the other. But the irony of it is, what is your favorite thing? Whatever that is the one you know least about. And secondly, it's the one that drags you. It drags you, and it submerges you in this cauldron of the 11 great fires, and that is where you suffocate to death. By my standards, I don't know why we call that favorite. Because if you look it up in the dictionary, favorite has to have a very different meaning. Actually, let's see what the dictionary says. What is the meaning of favorite? Let's see what the dictionary says. Favorite. Just punching that into the dictionary. Favorite.
Favorite.
It says liked more than others of the same kind. There you go. It's liked more than others of the same kind. That's the Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary. So, liked more than others of the same kind. Why is it liked? It's liked more than others, but it's the one that you know least about, and it's the one that drags you and drops you into the 11 great fires. How could that be liked more than the others? Is the fundamental problem that I am grappling with, and you see that is the irony here. It is nonsensical, and that is all. That is what ignorance is, after all, being nonsensical. But do you understand, folks? We create this sensual world in our minds, and that sensual mind is created using the very thing that we believe is pleasurable, joyful, and essential, but it's the very thing that creates suffering in our minds. So it's a recipe for disaster. Does that make sense? And in the creation of that sensual world, there are no time bounds. It's free of time, that the time dimension, and by that token, right, suffering is available on demand. People think that it's joy that's available on demand, but rather no, it's suffering that's available on demand. It's suffering that's available on demand. Suffering that's available around the clock. Unbound by the dimensions of time, unbound by the restrictions of time, you have suffering in abundance. There's plentiful of suffering, all thanks to ignorance. So you see, is there a bigger curse than ignorance in itself? So is there a better medicine, more potent medicine, than that which destroys ignorance, that which unveils ignorance to reveal the true state of affairs, the true state of things, the truth of the world? That is what we need to reflect on. That is the whole purpose of this activity and what we're all about. So thank you to all those who've responded with answers, and that's what I say. It's an indication to us, because of course, there's no other way I can gauge your interaction and your level of understanding with some of the concepts that we talk about. And I know some of these are quite abstract. Some of these things are a little bit heavy, but it's never something that you need to give up on. But that feedback in terms of, I don't need anyone to tell me that the sermons are good or great. That's not what I'm asking for. But if you can provide, from time to time, I'm not saying you need to, I'm saying when you do, this is how it affects the whole process. When you do provide some feedback, then it's always an indication that that you're on board. If you are here, then I would be able to gauge that just by looking at you or asking some questions. And usually at the end of sermons, you always come and ask questions to further clarify any points that were unclear. So thank you to all those who've sent responses, and I think all of the responses that came back alluded to the same points that we have just discussed here. So it's great to see that you're on the ball. Okay, so also thank you to the person who sent the question through, because I think it was a very interesting question from many angles. It was interesting in multiple facets. Looking at and dissecting that problem from multiple angles, we've been able to, I think, really understand how we can find a solution to problems, but rather than finding individual answers to questions. I think we managed to come up with some practical methods in which we can approach this problem. So I hope that the answer has been satisfactory in that sense. And I'll re-emphasize what I said right at the beginning. Whenever you have a question like this, first personalize the question. Make sure that you think about the question as if it were one of your own, because then you pay attention to it. And two, you will be able to extract from the response bits and pieces that you can apply into your own questions. I want you to become independent so that one day my presence here becomes unnecessary, whereby you can sort your own problems out, you can find answers to your own questions, you can find, because you'll have the solution to the problem, and once you've got that, all questions will be answered. Okay, so we'll leave it at that for today. Let's take a moment to transfer the merits, and we'll bring the sermon to a close. Okay, so let us all then take a moment to transfer the merits that we have all acquired by making offerings to the infinite virtues of the Noble Triple Gem, chanting Pirit, listening to the Dhamma, and engaging in various meritorious deeds today. First and foremost, let us remind ourselves how incredibly fortunate we are to be in receipt of the Lord Buddha's teaching, and with immense gratitude, let us transfer these merits to the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, upasakas and upasikas, who since time immemorial have protected and preserved the sublime teachings of the Buddha, and passed them down through the generations of the noble lineage in the form of the Tripitaka, which is thankfully available to us today to study, understand, and comprehend the Dhamma. Let us also transfer the merits we have acquired to all members of the Mahasangha present throughout the world, including the chief prelates of all the chapters, who have dedicated their lives to the noble path and have committed themselves towards the betterment of all sentient beings. Let us not forget that among them are the monks and nuns resident in your local temples and nunneries, who have always been by your side through thick and thin, come rain or shine. Let us also transfer these merits to Guru Swami Mahans and all other monks resident at this monastery, as well as the Anagarikas and Anagarikas attached to the monastery. Let us also take a moment to transfer these merits and express our gratitude to those who make great efforts to disseminate the teachings of the Buddha, be that by transliterating these sermons, sharing them out with others, or inviting others to join them. And may, through the power of these merits, if any of them have been born in the woeful plane, redeem themselves and be born in the blissful plane. And may, through the power of these merits, they abstain from the unmeritorious deeds, fulfill the meritorious deeds, fulfill the noble eightfold path, and attain the supreme bliss of Nibbana. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Let us also transfer these merits we have acquired to our devotees, friends of the monastery, who for the sake of merits continue to sustain the Mahasangha. This includes everyone from those of you who have contributed to the construction of the monastery, to those of you who provide the Mahasangha with shelter, arms, robes, and medicines, as well as those who have passed on their know-how and continue to extend their well wishes. And may, through the power of these merits, they abstain from the unmeritorious deeds, fulfill the meritorious deeds, fulfill the noble eightfold path, and attain the supreme bliss of Nibbana. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Let us also take a moment to transfer merits to our mothers and fathers, husbands and wives, brothers and sisters, sons and daughters, grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins, nephews, and nieces, our elders and our friends and acquaintances, employers and employees, and to all those who have helped us and supported us, assisted us in any way, shape, or form. May, by the power of these merits, they be healed of any physical and mental ailments and overcome any obstacles to their spiritual progress. May they abstain from the unmeritorious deeds, fulfill the meritorious deeds, fulfill the noble eightfold path, and may they all attain the supreme bliss of Nibbana. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Let us also take a moment to transfer merits to the Devas and Brahmas, spirits and demons, and primarily the Sakadevas, as all the numerous gods and deities who are committed to protect and fulfill the Samdhashasana. Let us also transfer merits to our guardian deities who keep a watchful eye over us and keep us out of harm's way, and may, through the power of these merits, they prosper in divine power and wisdom, and may they abstain from the unmeritorious deeds, fulfill the meritorious deeds, fulfill the noble eightfold path, and may they all attain the supreme bliss of Nibbana. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Let us also take a moment to transfer merits to our ancestors who have predeceased us, and to all who have been our families, friends, and acquaintances in this infinite long journey in samsara, and who have helped us and supported us and assisted us in every way they could. Let us take a moment to transfer these merits to them. Let us also transfer merits to the members of the armed forces as well as the police force who have sacrificed their lives to protect the peace and harmony of our nation and continue to do so. And may all those who have lost their lives in the war, be their friend or foe, rejoice in the merits that we have acquired today. Let us also transfer merits to all those who have lost their lives in natural calamities such as the tsunamis and earthquakes, landslides and pandemics, including the most recent and prevailing one, reminding ourselves that among them will be those who have been friends and family to us in this long journey in samsara. Let us take a moment to transfer merits to them as well. And may, through the power of these merits, if any of them have been born in the woeful planes, redeem themselves and be born in the blissful plane. May they abstain from the unmeritorious deeds, fulfill the meritorious deeds, fulfill the noble eightfold path, and may they all attain the supreme bliss of Nibbana. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Finally, let us all resolve that may, through the power and blessings of all the merits we have acquired throughout the day, we be able to witness the advent of many hundreds of thousands of arahants on this blessed land. And finally, May, to the power of all the merits we have acquired today, you and I and everyone who has helped make this program a success, become an Arahatun Mahanse or an Arahat Mahinin Mahanse in this very life and in the era of the Gautama Supreme Buddha itself. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. On that note, we will conclude today's sermon. May the blessings of the Noble Triple Gem be with you all.